Israeli Defense Forces bombarded the Syrian regime's military headquarters in Damascus on Wednesday, following deadly chaos that erupted near its border between Syrian troops and warring local groups. In a region brimming with conflicts, the recent violence points to yet another complicated struggle. So what exactly is going on in Syria? Here's everything you need to know. The Israeli attack on Syria's defense ministry comes after Israel announced it struck military tanks in the country's Suwayda province on Monday. The area had become a battleground between pro-government Sunni Bedouin tribes along with government forces on one side and the Druze militia on the other. Israel has vowed to protect the Druze, a minority Arab group of about 1 million people, over half of whom live in Syria. The group follows a religion that is an offshoot of a branch of Shia Islam. Most Druze in Syria live in areas around the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights in the southern part of the country. Now, Israel seized the strategic location in the 1967 Mideast War and annexed it in 1981. More than 20,000 Druze live in the Golan Heights, along with about 25,000 Jewish settlers from Israel. In Israel, the group is seen as a loyal minority and often serve in the armed forces there. The Druze in Syria, however, have been engaged in a conflict with pro-government armed forces in recent months. The country is still recovering from the fallout from their nearly 14-year-long civil war, which killed hundreds of thousands and finally ended in December after the country's former president Bashar al-Assad was overthrown. Syria's new president, Ahmed al-Sharaa, vowed to form an open, multicultural government to revive his war-torn nation. However, he only included one Druze member in the new 23-member government that he announced in March. Meanwhile, Sunni extremist forces who were oppressed under the brutal Assad regime are now loyal to al-Sharaa and have set their sights on religious minorities. Fears had been rising that the Druze would be the next group targeted after revenge attacks in March from Sunni factions along the Alawite minority. It's an ethnic group of former President Assad. The mass killings left hundreds dead, and subsequently in April, fighting between Druze and pro-government forces left over 100 more dead, this according to CNN. Clashes erupted between the Druze and Sunni Bedouin clans in Suwayda after members of a Bedouin tribe in the area set up a checkpoint where they attacked and robbed a young Druze man reported to be a vegetable seller. The incident sparked a back and forth of kidnappings between the two factions, eventually leading to clashes breaking out between the armed groups. Government forces were sent into Suwayda early Monday morning with the goal of restoring order in the province. However, some members actively participated in helping the Bedouins. Reports and videos soon surfaced purporting to show Syrian government forces burning Druze homes and humiliating their men by forcibly shaving their mustaches. Subsequent fighting in the area left over 350 people dead, along with widespread destruction of residential homes and churches, and this is according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. The violence also led to hundreds of Syrian Druze attempting to cross the border into Israel in order to escape the conflict. In response, on Monday, the IDF launched their first in a series of attacks on Syrian military assets, vowing to protect the Syrian Druze from Damascus and reinforce their army along the occupied Golan Heights. The office of Benjamin Netanyahu said in a statement, quote, "Israel is committed to preventing harm to the Druze in Syria due to the deep fraternal alliance with our Druze citizens in Israel, as well as their familial and historical ties to the Druze in Syria." On Wednesday, Israel struck the entrance to Syria's new government's military headquarters in the country's capital of Damascus, as well as another target near the presidential palace, according to the IDF. An IDF spokesperson said that the strikes were a, quote, message to the President Ahmed al-Sharaa, who has former ties to al-Qaeda. Israel and Syria had been in talks to rebuild their relations under the new regime, with U.S. envoy to Syria Tom Barrack touting that permanent peace would be possible back in May. He has since condemned the violence in Suwayda, calling for the perpetrators of the attacks against the Druze to be held accountable. On Wednesday, the Interior Ministry of Syria announced a ceasefire agreement with the city's Druze religious leaders in that same region, and government forces withdrew that evening. In a televised address to the nation, al-Sharaa spoke directly to the Druze population.
I also address the Druze people, who are an integral part of the fabric of this nation. Syria will never be a place for division or fragmentation, or sowing discord among its people. We assure you that protecting your rights and freedom is one of our priorities, and we reject any effort that aims to drag you to an external party or to create division within our ranks.
We had some breaking news this morning. In Syria, there are some strikes by Israel because there were attacks in that northern region, that northern border region, and Israel's not going to stand for it. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, just a little bit ago at the State Department said, guys, maybe you want to back off, tamp it down a little bit. But this is a unfolding situation and some breaking news, and that's why Trey Yingst is going to join us from Tel Aviv for an update. Good morning, Trey.
Yeah, hey, Dana, good morning. All of these Israeli strikes taking place in response to violence that is erupting in the Suwayda province of southern Syria. There is a Druze population in southern Syria that is supported by the Israeli government. So when violence erupted there earlier this week, the Israelis began to carry out a series of airstrikes against Syrian government tanks that were approaching the city. There was concern that they would participate in the fighting that was being done between the Druze and a Syrian Sunni Bedouin tribe. Now, as this was erupting, there were warnings and conversations taking place with Israeli officials using back channels to speak with the Syrian government, telling them not to enter the Suwayda province because it could be a threat not only to Israel as these forces got closer to Israeli territory, but also to the Druze minority population there. Whenever the government forces continued forward, the Israelis decided to launch a series of airstrikes today against the Syrian capital of Damascus, targeting not only military headquarters in the capital, but also a position within the presidential compound, right next to the presidential palace. Now, we do know that the U.S. Special Envoy to Syria, Tom Barrack, has issued a statement condemning the violence against civilians in southern Syria and urging de-escalation. He praised the Syrian government for putting out a similar statement condemning the violence, but indicated their actions and words needed to match. The key here is that the Israelis want the Syrian government to ensure that the situation de-escalates and that the Druze population is protected. At this point, based on the videos that have circulated online over the past 48 hours, the Druze population is not being protected, and that is the reason that you saw these Israeli strikes earlier today. But again, the latest information that we have, the Israeli Air Force has conducted a series of airstrikes against positions in the Syrian capital of Damascus, targeting government-linked positions there.
All right,
Dana.
Trey Yingst, thank you for that breaking news development. We'll keep everyone.
In Suwayda, Syria, Islamist militias stormed Druze neighborhoods, backed by regime forces, killing more than 2,000 people. They butchered entire families and raided hospitals. Survivors say the carnage rivals October 7th. And it's not only the Druze. One of the most horrific reports, Pastor Khaled Mezer of the Good Shepherd Evangelical Church in Suwayda was murdered along with 19 family members. Their last photo was taken just days before the massacre.
They killed a 3-month-old baby in cold blood. They killed about 100 doctors, nurses, patients, just slaughtered them in the hospital. And that's the government who did that.
Israel responded, striking regime forces, then quietly coordinated a medical aid mission to Suwayda, airlifting equipment and supplies to a devastated hospital. For Druze Israelis watching from across the Golan Heights, however, it wasn't enough.
So this is Majd al-Shams, which is an Israeli Druze village that's right on the Syrian border. This is the border fence right here, and Syria is just the other side over there. You can see that there is a heavy presence of IDF here now, and that's because the Druze people, more than 1,000 of them, crossed through that fence the other day and went into Syria to help their brethren who are being killed on the other side.
Hundreds illegally crossed through the border fence, on foot, others in cars. Many hoped to fight. Most were simply desperate to help.
When I saw the videos about the killing of my community, I felt so angry as all of the Druze of Israel. We wanted to do something. We saw the gates are open and we didn't ask. We want to join the fighting. If the fight wants to stop, we will join. We'll do what we can do. We can't stay silent.
It was just about a year ago right here on this soccer field. And it was a night very much like this one. A lot of young kids out here playing when a Hezbollah rocket came in and landed on this field and killed 12 young people. The city of Majd al-Shams, only 12,000 people, everyone knew one of those kids. And it is still reeling to this day.
And across the fence, more Druze children are dying. While the IDF has resecured the border and brought many of the Druze back, pressure is mounting. Residents say if Israel doesn't intervene, they will. With family on the other side, the pain is personal.
If the Druze in Suwayda, the man would have fallen, we would have witnessed an October 7 epic scale, apocalyptic scale. And the IDF, again, stopped it. So if you think about it, the only one who actually stopped the genocide already twice in 2 years are the Israelis.
The UN, though, is blasting Israel for getting involved to save the Druze.
The Secretary General is also concerned by Israel's airstrikes on Syrian territory and calls on Israel to refrain from violations of Syria's independence, its sovereignty, and its territorial integrity.
Last week, Israeli jets struck targets near Damascus and Suwayda, including what appeared to be Syrian military headquarters. Analysts say the message is clear. Israel is drawing a red line.
We're not doing a favor here to the Druze. Yes, we have a blood covenant with them and we're doing the right thing, the Jewish thing. We're doing the humane thing and protecting our allies and innocent people. But the people who came to slaughter the Druze will tomorrow come to slaughter the Jews and the Christians and the Americans, the Europeans, and anyone, they're the enemy of the West.
Inside Suwayda, an uneasy ceasefire has taken hold. But jihadis have not forgotten the recent fighting, and fighters are already returning. Residents say they're determined to finish what they started.
I can't stay still watching my relatives, my people being slaughtered without doing anything. I know I don't have military experience, but at least I would do the minimum I can do to help my people. I can't see them dying and not doing anything.
From Majd al-Shams, I'm Chuck Holt for CBN News.
Subscribe to One India and never miss an update. Download the One India app now.
A convoy of Israeli military vehicles were seen driving into Syria after Israeli airstrikes hit Damascus. And you can see 5 vehicles crossing the border, with some carrying equipment. Heavy airstrikes from Israel damaged areas near the defense ministry and the presidential palace. Israeli forces are pushing back after Syrian forces attacked Druze communities in southern Syria that share a border with the Golan Heights. Now, Syria's interim president Ahmed al-Sharaa addressed the nation and says protecting the Druze citizens is their priority. He says the Syrian people are not afraid of war and have spent their lives defending their nation. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he addressed the situation in the Oval Office just yesterday. Listen.
We think we're on our way towards a real de-escalation and then hopefully get back on track in helping Syria build a country and arriving at a situation there in the Middle East is far more stable.
And I want to bring in CBS News Middle East reporter Courtney Keeley. Courtney, thank you for joining us today. We know Secretary Rubio called this an unfortunate situation and a misunderstanding, but what does he mean by that? And for our viewers who are not aware of the history there, can you give us some updates on exactly how this all unfolded?
Sure. So this started in southeastern Syria in a town called Suwayda. And you have to remember that the Druze are a very closed community. It's actually a secretive Islamic sect that started in the 10th century, and it's very traditional and very much a community. And I've been to these places, and it feels almost antiquated how some people continue their traditions. And there's a history throughout this region of decades. Look at the wars, civil wars in Beirut. Druze being involved in southern Lebanon with the IDF and also from Israel. So you have Druze communities, but essentially they're autonomous and they're a minority. So the question is, will Ahmed al-Sharaa respect the minorities of Syria? And there was a misunderstanding, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio did have that right, that between Bedouin and Druze there was an outbreak of fighting. And it's the Syrian government forces came in, and coming in that close to the Israeli border made Israeli forces take action, aggressive action, and they bombed military compounds right in the heart of Damascus. We saw a video with an anchor talking about it, and then a bomb goes off behind her. It's very provocative, and it would be an escalation, except that cooler heads seem to be prevailing, not only on the U.S. side, but also on the Syrian side. And President Trump has lifted American sanctions. He's interested in fostering peace within Syria after a fractious and devastating and traumatic 14-year civil war. So you have to remember that these outbreaks and these clashes can be quelled, but it's a hard calculation to make sure that no one feels like they're under Israeli airstrikes or they're not being respected by the government. So that's what's happening in Syria.
That was actually a very good breakdown, because I understand it very clearly now, Courtney. Thank you for that.
That's my job.
Thank you. So, Courtney, sources tell CBS News that the Trump administration is cautiously optimistic that we could get a break in the Gaza negotiations this week that could lead to a 60-day ceasefire and also hostage release. What exactly are you hearing about that?
Okay, well, I have to tell you, to break it down to you, cautiously optimistic is a word that's been used in Middle East peace proposals and trying to effort Middle East peace on all different levels for years. It's very much a diplomatic term, but a journalist like myself is like, sure, cautiously optimistic, but we shall see. Now, it does look, according to what CBS has heard, that there are talks and there could be a breakthrough. Now, the Qatari Prime Minister had a private dinner with President Trump last night, extending into the night, and they have a good relationship. He also met with Bahrain leadership in the morning, and this is the Gulf really efforting change and having Qatar as the mediator, to having Qatar having dinner with President Trump is the good sign. And according to CBS sources, the IDF is looking to reposition itself inside Gaza. They're interested in opening it up to much needed food and aid. Also, the much needed release of Israeli hostages for these poor, desperate families, 20 living Israeli hostages. So that's what seems to be on the table, according to CBS News. It's all very finely tuned, according to what Hamas will agree to and according to what the Israeli government will agree to. And Netanyahu is having further problems in his coalition. So it's not just Hamas that wants an end to the war and might only say that they'll only hold out for that, but this is a very tricky situation for Netanyahu to come to the table and keep his coalition intact.
Courtney Keeley, thank you so much. We really appreciate your insight today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Any questions?
Any comments on the developments in Syria at the moment?
Well, I can comment. I think I'll ask Marco to say a few words on Syria.
Yeah, it's complicated, obviously. These are historic, long-time rivalries between different groups in the southwest of Syria, Bedouins, the Druze community, and it led to an unfortunate situation and a misunderstanding, it looks like, between the Israeli side and the Syrian side. So we've been engaged with them all morning long and all night long with both sides, and we think we're on our way towards a real de-escalation and then hopefully get back on track in helping Syria build a country and arriving at a situation there in the Middle East is far more stable. So in the next few hours, we hope to see some real progress to end what you've been seeing over the last couple hours.
8:52 is the time. Welcome back to Live Now from Fox. Good morning to you if you're just now tuning in. I'm Jeanette Francine. We are following some breaking news out in the Middle East. Take a good look at your screen. The very latest from Israel Defense Forces this Wednesday morning as they put out on X moments ago, quote, the IDF struck the entrance of the Syrian regime's military headquarters in the area of Damascus in Syria. The IDF continues to monitor developments and the regime's actions against the Druze civilians in southern Syria. In accordance with directives from the political echelon, the IDF is striking in the area and remains prepared for various scenarios. And as we discuss those strikes happening in the area, we actually are getting a live look in Damascus here at 8:52 on the East Coast. Take a look at the destruction on your screen. You can also see some smoke there in the distance. AP reporting clashes rage in the Syrian city there this Wednesday after a ceasefire between government forces and Druze armed groups collapsed. This as Israel threatens to escalate its involvement, saying it's in support of the Druze religious minority. The Israeli army, again, as I mentioned, hitting near the entrance to the Syrian Ministry of Defense in Damascus, targeting the same site several hours later with a larger strike. Israel has also launched a series of airstrikes on convoys of government forces in southern Syria since the clashes erupted and has beefed up forces along the border. Now, Syria's defense ministry earlier blamed militias in the Druze-majority area, saying that they were violating a ceasefire agreement that had been reached Tuesday. They say this has caused Syrian army soldiers to return fire. It said they were, quote, adhering to rules of engagement to protect residents, prevent harm, and ensure the safe return of those who left the city back to their homes, end quote. Meanwhile, reports of attacks on civilians continue to surface this Wednesday, with Druze and family members in conflict zones as they search desperately for information about their fate amid communication blackouts.
We are also operating in Syria. We are committed to keeping southwestern Syria a demilitarized zone in relation to the state of Israel. We will not allow a situation to return where a second Lebanon is established there. We are also committed to protecting the Druze residents. We are doing this through intense operations. I hope we won't need to act further. Much depends on what is understood and done, or not done, in Damascus.
Powerful airstrikes rocked Damascus on Wednesday, targeting the defense ministry and hitting next to the presidential palace in the Syrian capital. Israel has vowed to destroy Syrian government forces attacking Druze communities in southern Syria and demanded they withdraw. Shortly before the blasts, Israel's defense minister had said painful blows will come. Scores of people have been killed this week in violence around the southern city of Suwayda. Fighting between the Druze minority, government security forces, and members of Bedouin tribes has prompted Israel to strike repeatedly with the declared aim of protecting the Druze. Druze are followers of an offshoot religion of Islam and are spread between Syria, Lebanon and Israel. Druze in Israel have been calling on the Israeli military to protect Druze in Syria.
On Wednesday, a group from the community broke through the Israel-Syria border fence in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu asked Druze citizens in Israel not to cross the border into Syria, saying the situation was very grave and they could be kidnapped or killed. The Israeli military said it continued to strike Syrian regime targets in southern Syria, including tanks and pickup trucks mounted with machine guns heading towards Suwayda. The violence has underlined big challenges facing interim President Ahmed al-Sharaa, despite warming ties with the United States. He seeks to stitch Syria back together in the face of deep misgivings from groups that reject Islamist rule.
ايش يعني سوري مسلم ولا درزه؟ درزه يا اخي درزه زي هو درزه هاويته درزه هاويته درزه والله لا يا اخي درزه يا اخي الله اكبر الله اكبر
Fighting in Syria's southern city of Suwayda has left more than 900 people reportedly dead in sectarian clashes. Syrian government forces accused of atrocities against Druze civilians.
Conflicts between the Druze and the neighboring Sunni Bedouin tribes have been a constant throughout Syrian history. They have been happening for centuries. This episode marks the first time that the central government in Damascus deliberately took the side of the Bedouin tribes in these clashes with the Druze.
ويقولون لنا الأهالي هنا أن هذه الجثة على سبيل المثال قام دواعش الجولاني بدفها وهو حي. هذا هو هذه آثار الدبابة.
إعدامه.
هؤلاء هم الذين يسمون أنفسهم الأمن العام والجيش السوري، دواعش الجولاني الإرهابيين.
آثار قذائف الهاون وقذائف المسيرات التي استهدفت منازل المدنيين في حي مساكن الخضر في مدينة سويداء.
Suwayda, or Jabal al-Druze, the Druze mountain as it's known in Syria, has always stood a little bit apart. Since the Assad regime fell, it has been almost entirely autonomous. The local Druze militias are manning the checkpoints, they are policing the streets, they are governing their own affairs. And the central government in Damascus has been negotiating for months to insert a presence. They wanted to make an example of Druze autonomy, of breaking Druze autonomy and bringing Suwayda back under the firm control of Damascus. And in order to do that, they invited in tens of thousands of Sunni militiamen from all parts of the country. And within a day, we were seeing gruesome videos of beheadings, execution of Druze civilians, of bodies lying in hospitals, clearly summarily executed, and widespread scenes of looting, ransacking, and vandalism with a heavy sectarian overtone.
بدنا شهاداتكم على المجازر اللي قامت، شو انتم شاهدين؟ شهادتكم على الأحداث اللي تمارست هون.
هاي الأرض بتشهد هون، هذا الوضع بيشهد هون.
جماعة طائفيين فاتوا كبروا علينا لولا ما لطف الله وكان موجود بطل بهالحارة الله يرد عنه وعن أولاده هو اللي تصدى له وكان شخص لحاله على فكرة يعني وهني فاتوا آخر شيء فاتوا انتقامية فوتوا الدبابة تبعهم لهون وبلشوا مثل ما أنتم شايفين
على ما سمعنا قالوا إنه
ما تخلي حدا
لا ما بتخلي حجر ولا بشر هيك أوامرنا ما بتخلي لا حجر ولا بشر بدي الدم يسيل على الحارة هيك يقول له بدي أشوف حمام الدم ماشي الله لا يوفقه ولا هو رئيس ولا هو دولي هو عبارة عن جزار.
Why did they do this now? Well, a few days prior, the Damascus government had met with a delegation from the Syrian Democratic Forces, the predominantly Kurdish militia that is governing northeastern Syria, in an attempt as part of a months-long saga of negotiating if and how these two parts of Syria will be reintegrated into a reunified country. And reportedly, sources at that meeting have said that the Kurdish delegation essentially told the Syrian foreign minister, Shaybani, that why should we submit to Damascus's authority when you can't even control Suwayda, this tiny province, 1/10 our size, that's right on Damascus's doorstep. And reportedly, Shaybani said, just wait a few days.
انت كنت خلال الاحداث هون؟
ولا كنا كان طول الليل ما قدرناش ننام مرصاد. اخر شيء بلشوا فينا بالار بي جي. وجد قذيفه على الشقه اللي فوق حرقوها.
قذيفه هاون انفجرت في منازل المدنيين. آثار القصف الهمجي البربري الطائفي العنصري.
One of the reasons why Sharaa was willing to gamble on a massacre in Suwayda is that he has felt welcomed into the fold internationally since his meeting with President Trump and Trump's subsequent decision to waive all sanctions on Syria. That coupled with the beginnings of Israeli-Syrian peace negotiations in Azerbaijan gave Sharaa the sense that the pressure is off and the international community is welcoming of his attempts to forcibly reintegrate all of Syria under his control. And I think it has backfired on him enormously.
الجيش سيواصل مهاجمة قوات
Israel has carried out airstrikes on the Syrian capital of Damascus in response to clashes in Syria's south.
On the Israeli front, it's important to note they want to demilitarize southern Syria. They want to create a buffer zone so as to mitigate the likelihood of any future Syrian-Israeli friction.
אנחנו קבענו מדיניות ברורה. פירוז המרחב דרומית לדמשק, מהגולן ועד אזור הר הדרוזים. זה קו אחד. הקו השני, שמירה על האחים של האחים שלנו, הדרוזים בהר הדרוזים.
There's an enormous degree of solidarity between the Jewish and Druze populations of Israel. The Druze serve in the army. They are loyal citizens. They have done everything they can to integrate into the Israeli social fabric. And so when the Druze of Syria appear under threat by Islamist militants of the same sort that massacred over 1,000 Israelis on October 7th, Israelis felt a very strong sense of wanting to defend, as Netanyahu put it, the brothers of our brothers.
חיל האוויר תקף גם את כנופיות הרצח וגם את הרקד, והוספתי יד גם לתקוף בדמשק את משרד הביטחון. בתוצאה מהפעילות העצומה הזאת, השתררה הפסקת אש, והכוחות הסורים נסוגו חזרה לדמשק.
So the Syrian militias began to withdraw from Suwayda on July 19th, and really since July 20th, the area has been calm and almost entirely in the hands of Druze militias. There have been some 80,000 people have been displaced by this fighting, primarily Druze, but a smaller number of Bedouin who have been evacuated from Suwayda city. We talk a lot about siloed media in the US. The Syrian version of siloed media, the Druze media is entirely focused on the displacement and crimes of the Sunni militias, and the Syrian central media is entirely focused on the displacement of the Bedouin and violations committed by Druze militias. And it should be noted that both are real. It's just that the scale is vastly disproportionate and overwhelmingly implicates these Sunni militias. The Syrian Network for Human Rights has estimated that about 585 or so civilians have been killed. They don't count fighters in that tally. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights estimates that the number of dead is over 1,500, and it's likely somewhere in between. Where do we go from here? Well, one of the Things that we're seeing is that basically Bashar's insistence on folding all of Syria forcibly under the centralized rule of Damascus, that this approach is not working. Suwayda is now entirely under the control of Druze militias and under an effective Israeli protectorate. And the Kurdish northeast, which Bashar was hoping to cow, called off their forthcoming summit with Damascus, saying that the gaps were just too large to bridge.
طيب شو شكل الحكم الأمثل لسوريا لتفادي المجازر أو ما حصل في الساحل أو السويداء؟
كل مكون في سوريا يطلب حقه، ونحن كأكراد سوريا نطلب الفيدرالية سوريا لا مركزية. كل مكون له حق يعيش في سوريا، أم كان عربيا أو كرديا أو مسيحيا أو تركمانيا، من حقه يعيش في سوريا كمواطن سوري. نحن لا نقبل بأي جمهورية عربية سورية تداول قبلا من قبل الدولة السورية.
Syrian minorities all over the country, the Kurds in the northeast, the Alawites in the coast, the Christians in Damascus, all of them are looking at these episodes of the massacre on the Alawite coast, now the pogrom in Suwayda, and they're wondering to themselves, do we really have a future in this new Syria? And the answer is not clear.
Now, the Syrian and the Israeli ministers are set to meet in Azerbaijan's Baku to discuss the security matters in southern Syria. The meeting between the Syrian Foreign Minister Asad al-Sharaa and the Israeli Minister of Strategic Affairs Ron Dermer follows a similar meeting between the two ministers in Paris last week. Now, ahead of the talks in Baku, al-Sharaa is reportedly set to visit Moscow, marking a significant development in the country's relations with Russia. Now, Russia, remember, was a key backer of the former President Bashar al-Assad, who was overthrown in an Islamist-led offensive in December last year. Now, Israel and Syria have been at loggerheads since 1948, with occasional periods of calm. Recent talks between the two countries started after violent clashes in southern Syria's Suwayda province, which killed over 1,400 people. Meanwhile, the United Nations is gearing up to send a humanitarian aid convoy to Suwayda after bloodshed in the region displaced approximately 176,000 people. So far, the United Nations has been working with the Syrian Arab Red Crescent to deliver aid. And now Syria's foreign ministry has granted the United Nations aid agencies the green signal to access the province directly. The new convoys will include essential supplies like food, water, medical aid and fuel.
We've sent enough for 50,000 people, but again, the entire population needs support. And we have estimates that there were 500,000 people living in the governorate before. So we're estimating that literally 500,000 people would need support. Some have left, of course, but nonetheless, anybody who is impacted by the violence in Suwayda requires support.
Now, furthermore, the Kurdish authorities in northeastern Syria released families from the Al-Hol detention camp following an agreement with the Syrian government that was reached in the month of May. The camp holds over 50,000 people, most of them women and children, many of whom are family members of the suspected ISIS fighters.
It is time for Syrians wishing to leave the camps to return to inside Syria. Today, we are at the Al-Hol camp, and this is the second humanitarian convoy to leave the camp for inside Syria. The number of families is 36, consisting of 127 people.
I feel like a bird in a cage that will finally be set free. Enough, we have suffered a lot. We have been here in the camp for over 7 years. We want to leave to see our families again. I haven't seen my family for 15 years, and I will finally be able to reunite with them.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
We have to remember that there are about 150,000 Druze in Israel. They have been lobbying like mad with Netanyahu. They serve in the military, very loyal Israelis, and have said, please protect our Druze kin who are just across the border there in the Jebel Druze. Secondly, Israel does not trust Ahmed Sharaa. Israel has a very dramatically different view of him than does the United States. And they have said from the day he took power, he's a jihadist. He used to run al-Qaeda. We don't trust him. We don't want him to move. any troops south of Damascus's border. The Israelis want to keep Syria divided and weak. The Druze situation is a pretext, or is a handy way for them to keep Syria weak.
In a big diplomatic moment, Russia warmly welcomed Syria's brand new foreign minister, Fazal al-Maghdad al-Shaibani, to Moscow. Well, this was his very first official visit since stepping into the role. And you know, where did he go? Not to Washington, not to the United Kingdom, United Nations, but straight to Moscow. Now that says a lot, right? Russian foreign minister personally received him and made it loud and clear that Russia is fully backing the Syrian government and its people. He didn't just offer any polite handshake and smiles. He spoke about revamping every major deal between the two countries through a very special joint mechanism. Let me translate this for you. Expect more Russian weapons, energy projects, and military cooperation heading towards Syria. So, why does that matter? Let's unpack. Syria has been isolated globally for years, specifically by the West over its civil war and internal crackdowns. But Russia stood by the president, Bashar al-Assad, backing his government militarily and politically since 2015. Of course, it's no secret that Moscow played a key role in keeping Assad in power when rebel forces and international pressure nearly toppled him. Now, his visit shows that Russia is doubling down on its influence in the Middle East. By hosting al-Baghdad and praising Syria's ability, Moscow is sending a clear message. Syria is open for business again, but only with its friends. He even thanks Syria for keeping Russian citizens very safe on Syrian soil, a not so subtle reminder that Russian forces are still active in the region, managing security zones, air bases, and strategic assets. Well, this meeting also comes at a time when Russia is facing its own global isolation after the invasion of Ukraine. So, creating new alliances or reinforcing the old ones is kind of part of Russia's playbook to show that it still has global friends and influence. There's also a hidden economic angle, by the way, with the Western sanctions biting both Russia and Syria. Both countries are looking at new ways to boost trade, sidestep sanctions, and even keep money flowing. Think oil, wheat, infrastructure, arm deals, areas where Russia has the upper hand and Syria has urgent needs. So what's next? Expect Russia and Syria to sign more defense and economic agreements, probably behind closed doors. Moscow will likely get access to Syrian ports and air bases. In return, Damascus will get military support, food supplies, and international legitimacy. So basically, in short, this wasn't just a friendly visit, it was power handshake, reminding the world that Russia still can call the shot in Syria and that the West cannot decide who is in and who's out in the new Middle East. And as always, when Russia makes a move, the ripple effects go far beyond the map.
to One India and never miss an update. Download the One India app now.
A war without declaration. Syria is being bombed, divided and redesigned. Israel strikes are only expanding and the US is backing Kurdish forces, and an old plan to split Syria along ethnic lines may finally be taking shape. Is this the next front in a regional realignment, and who's really rewriting Syria's future? More in this next report. Take a look.
Israel bombed Syria last month. Strikes hit Damascus, Homs and Suwayda. Tel Aviv claims it's protecting minorities, but this isn't just about Druze communities. It's about power and breaking Syria apart. Since the fall of Bashar al-Assad in December, Israel has seized over 400 square kilometers of Syrian land and wiped out critical pieces of the country's military infrastructure. All this while its war on Gaza enters month 23. Experts say the strategy fragments Syria into ethnic small regions, a Druze mini-state in the south, an Alawi strip on the coast, a Kurdish zone in the northeast, and a Sunni corridor backed by Turkey, an old plan which now seems in motion. This blueprint goes back to 1982, an Israeli policy paper known as the Yinon Plan, also known as the Greater Israel Plan, which called for the dissolution of Arab states into sectarian enclaves. And it's not just Israel. The US continues strikes in northeast Syria, backing Kurdish forces, blocking Iranian influence and maintaining control. But Turkey has different plans. After years of backing opposition forces, Ankara now supports Syria's unity and warns against any attempts to fragment it. Syria isn't just a country at war, it's a country being redesigned by powers who see it as strategic land, perhaps not a sovereign state. And as the strikes continue, the question is no longer who rules Syria, but what will be left of it.
In Syria's war-scarred southwest, the rumble of tanks breaks the dawn. Israeli ground forces push into Quneitra, striking deep before vanishing into the haze. From the skies, jets pound southern targets. In Damascus, political fault lines widen, the government walking away from talks meant to stitch the nation back together. On two fronts, military and political, Syria stands on the brink once more. The Israeli forces have advanced into several towns and villages in Syria's strategic southwestern province of Quneitra, where they reportedly established checkpoints and searched residents. The state-run Syrian Arab news agency, SANA, reported that 10 Israeli military vehicles departed from the Tel Amar base and proceeded towards the Barika Kudna road, where soldiers established a checkpoint. In a separate operation, another convoy of 10 vehicles raided the village of Ruwahina, pushing deeper toward Razm al-Halabi in central Quneitra. The agency also reported that 5 Israeli military vehicles entered the southern town of Al-Rafid from Al-Hiran via the Al-Asha crossing in the early hours of August 9th, advancing further towards the Al-Jala crossing. Additionally, an Israeli patrol accompanied by 2 tanks was seen moving from Al-Adnaniya towards Ruwahina, with the tanks taking positions on the village's outskirts. All Israeli forces later withdrew from the areas they had entered in both central and southern Quneitra. The Quneitra region holds a pivotal position, lying close to the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights, and has been a recurring flashpoint for tensions since the Yom Kippur War. Since the collapse of President Bashar al-Assad's government, Israel has repeatedly conducted airstrikes targeting Syrian military installations, weapons depots, and other strategic facilities. Damascus has accused Tel Aviv of taking advantage of Syria's political and security vacuum to seize territory. Actions, it says, violate the 1974 ceasefire agreement signed after the 1973 war. In June, Israeli fighter jets carried out airstrikes on targets in southern Syria in response to what the Israel Defense Forces, or the IDF, described as the launch of 2 projectiles into Israeli territory. According to the IDF, the projectiles landed in unpopulated areas. Later that day, the Israeli military confirmed it had also conducted artillery strikes against positions in southern Syria.
A short while ago, the IDF struck an armed vehicle carrying a heavy machine gun in the area of southern Syria.
The IDF further stated that
2 projectiles were identified crossing from Syria into Israeli territory and fell in open areas.
Following the incident, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz blamed Syria's transitional government, led by Ahmed al-Sharaa, for the attack. A move that further heightens the already fraught relations between the two sides. The United Nations also condemned the attack, warning that Israeli military activities breached the ceasefire and undermined the buffer zone established under the agreement to reduce hostilities between the two countries. At the same time, tensions within Syria's fragmented political landscape have deepened, with the country's new government announcing it will not take part in upcoming meetings in Paris with the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or the SDF. The announcement casts serious doubt over an integration agreement signed earlier this year between the SDF and the interim government that took power following the overthrow of longtime President Bashar al-Assad in December. Quoting an unnamed government source, state-run news agency Sana reported that any future negotiations should be held in the Syrian capital, Damascus, describing it as the legitimate and national address for dialogue among Syrians. The SDF, a coalition that was the primary US-backed partner in the fight against Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant and ISIS in Syria, signed the March agreement with the new government to begin integrating into state institutions. The deal was touted as a landmark step towards stitching back together a country fractured by 14 years of civil conflict. Under the agreement, the Kurdish-led forces, which control around a quarter of Syrian territory, and the semi-autonomous Kurdish regional governing bodies were to begin a phased process of incorporation into Damascus's structures. However, key details, particularly concerning military integration, remain unresolved. The SDF has maintained that its fighters must join Syria's armed forces as a unified bloc. The government, by contrast, has insisted that they enlist individually, effectively dissolving the group's independent command structure. The dispute flared again this week, one day after the Kurdish administration hosted a landmark conference attended by representatives of several Syrian minority communities. It was the first such gathering since Assad's ouster. The conference's final statement called for
a democratic constitution that establishes a decentralized state and ensures participation by all components of Syrian society.
Sana's August 9th report accused the conference of undermining the March deal, stating that the discussions dealt a blow to the ongoing negotiation efforts aimed at implementing the integration framework. The agency quoted the unnamed official as saying the government would not take part in the Paris meetings and
will not sit at the negotiating table with any side seeking to revive the era of the deposed regime under any name or cover.
The fallout over the talks comes amid renewed tensions on the ground. Participants in the Kurdish-organised conference also criticised the government over its handling of sectarian clashes in the southern province of Suwayda and along Syria's Mediterranean coast. In their concluding remarks, they argued that
the current constitutional declaration does not meet the aspirations of the Syrian people. It should be reviewed to ensure a wider participatory process and a fair representation in the transitional period.
These grievances echo a broader concern that the transitional government has failed to fully embrace inclusivity in Syria's post-Assad political architecture. The SDF, for its part, accused government-backed factions on August 9th of launching more than 22 attacks on areas under its control in northeastern Syria over the past month. In a statement, the group said it had shown restraint in the face of these aggressions, but warned that the continuation of such attacks threatens mutual trust and undermines understandings reached earlier in the year. The breakdown in trust between the two sides now threatens to stall the fragile progress made towards a political settlement in Syria. For many observers, the standoff highlights the fragility of post-war reconciliation efforts in a country still reeling from over a decade of conflict, external interventions, and deep sectarian divisions.
Syria is on fire again, and this time the flames are spreading really fast. In the southern city of Suwayda, calm lasted just for a few weeks. A fragile peace had taken hold, helped by the United States' brokered ceasefire. But now that peace is shattered. Violence has erupted once more. Armed groups suddenly launch attacks on security forces, killing at least one officer and leaving several others wounded. Explosions rang out and artillery shells rained down on nearby villages, breaking the truce in this mostly Druze region that has already seen too much bloodshed. But let me tell you, this didn't just end there. While Suwayda burned, another storm was building just across the border. You know what their goal was? Likely to push back Iran-linked fighters and Hezbollah operators believed to be using Syrian territory as a launchpad. And in the middle of all this, Turkey. Turkey is making a bold move. Their president is increasing his support for Syrian government, sending more weapons, more military supplies, and even more energy aids to Damascus. Now this has raised eyebrows across the region. Is their president preparing to enter the Syrian war more directly? Is this support a quiet deal with Assad or the beginning of something much bigger? Let's look at a bigger picture here. Syria is once again becoming a battlefield not just for Syrians, but for the foreign powers like Israel and Turkey, all fighting for their own interests. What happens next in Suwayda could actually trigger a wider war, and consequences could ripple far beyond the Middle East.
These are Israeli tanks on Syrian territory. Since the fall of the Assad regime, Israeli forces have moved beyond a demilitarized buffer zone and set at least 10 bases and outposts in Syria. Syrians are angry at Israel's violations of the 1974 disengagement agreement with their country. This video was posted by Israeli forces after they raided Syrian homes and arrested people, including a child, without proof of what they called an Iranian cell. That's in addition to Israel's military occupation of the Golan Heights in Syria and attacks on Syrian military facilities, including its navy, air defenses, jets, and heavy weaponry. But military incursions and occupation are not the only sources of tensions between Syria and Israel. Water security is also a major issue. Syrian media reports say the Israeli military now controls 40% of water sources shared by Syria and Jordan. After taking over the Al-Wahda Dam in the Yarmouk Basin in December, Israeli forces then advanced to the Al-Mantra Dam. But Syria is in a difficult position to respond. President Ahmed al-Shara's administration has to keep together a fragile unity government and not upset its Western supporters, who it needs to build its economy and gain international recognition as a safe partner. The Trump administration has lifted crippling sanctions on the country, and many believe the Syrian government has to do its part by improving ties with Israel as a quid pro quo.
Abraham Accords were announced at a big glamorous agreement during Trump 1 presidency. Not much of it has fulfilled its promises. So we could witness a signing ceremony in Washington, but that really doesn't mean much on the ground. It will take institutions, it will take a lot of time to settle the real issues on the ground, which is occupied territories.
But even if there is an understanding on the buffer zone and Israel respects Syrian sovereignty, the Sharaa administration is likely to have great difficulty selling it to many hardline factions and a population that largely opposes Zionism. Palestinians are part of Syrian society, and their struggles and suffering in Gaza resonate with Syrians. And then there are other regional and international considerations. Russian troops are based on Syrian territory, and while any deal may not affect that situation, it's more likely to have an impact on Syria's relationship with Turkey. Israel and Turkey are both vying for direct or indirect influence over Damascus.
Beyond this point is Syrian territory under the control of the Israeli government, and any diplomatic overtures will have to be met with balancing not just strong internal resistance, but also regional considerations, including that of Turkey, Jordan, and even Saudi Arabia. And to balance all of that, the Ahmed al-Sharaa administration has its work cut out for it. Saba Mujawed, Al Jazeera, Quneitra.
All right, and Syrian officials say an Israeli attack killed 3 soldiers near the capital Damascus, though Britain-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says the toll has risen to 6, all members of the 44th Division. An official at the Defense Ministry speaking on the condition of anonymity said an Israeli drone targeted one of the military buildings of the 44th Division of the Syrian Army in Kiswa, west of Damascus. Israel has carried out hundreds of strikes in Syria since an Islamist-led alliance toppled long-time ruler Bashar al-Assad in December. It has also opened talks with the interim authorities in Damascus. Earlier Tuesday, Syrian media reported that a young man was killed in an Israeli strike on a home in the village of Taranja on the formerly Syria-controlled side of the armistice line of the Golan Heights. Syria Foreign Ministry condemned the Israeli attacks on its territory. It also condemned Israeli forces' incursion into the town in the Quneitra countryside, their arrest campaigns against civilians, and their announcement of the continuation of their illegal presence on the summit of Mount Hermon and the buffer zone. Since Assad's overthrow, Israel has occupied much of the UN-patrolled demilitarized zone of the formerly Syria-controlled side of the armistice line, including the summit on Mount Hermon, the region's highest peak. Last week, Syrian Foreign Minister Asad al-Shabani met Israeli Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer in Paris to push for a return to the arrangements that had been in place since 1974 disengagement agreement.
In the heart of the Middle East, 3 stories collide. A mysterious call for a 150,000-strong parallel army to rise in Syria. A rare moment of diplomacy, Damascus and Israel face-to-face in Paris. And across the border, settlers with children crossing into Syria, seeking to plant a new community. From secret claims to open talks and reckless acts on the frontier, tonight we unravel the new fault lines shaping Syria's future. A parallel army, which is seen as an alternative to the Syrian armed forces and the government of Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa, is being proposed in the region. A report by the Emirati publication Airstrikes has claimed. According to the report, the force would be led by Anas al-Sheikh, better known online as Abu Zuhair al-Shami, an obscure opposition activist with around 10,000 followers on X. Al-Sheikh has frequently criticized Sharaa and the sectarian unrest in Suwayda, while also targeting Turkey and Qatar before later deleting many of his posts. The outlet described the proposed body as a quasi-federal army, led by a Sunni majority, but claiming to include fighters from all Syrian components. Al-Sheikh told Airstrikes the force would number more than 150,000 well-trained fighters, with its mission focused on preventing the partition of Syria.
Even if that side is government forces loyal to the current authorities.
He further argued the body would be above the constitution, insisting it would monitor, not obey, the transitional authority in place.
Monitoring the transitional authority is one of its main tasks to prevent it from overstepping against Syrians.
Al-Sheikh also claimed the initiative had international, particularly American, approval, and said it followed long and ongoing meetings, internally and with external parties. Among the stated tasks, he said, were the protection of minorities, ensuring freedom of belief and expression, guarding against demographic change, curbing ideological dominance and applying international detention standards. But a source close to Damascus dismissed the claims in remarks to Arabi 21, calling them baseless and without any grounding in reality. The source stressed that nearly all armed groups in Syria had been absorbed under the Ministry of Defense, which maintains defense pacts with Turkey and enjoys what he described as trust with Arab and Western states, including the United States. Meanwhile, Syria's state-run Sana agency has confirmed a rare meeting between Foreign Minister Assad Hassan al-Shaibani and an Israeli delegation in Paris, the first direct talks publicly acknowledged by Damascus. The discussions, mediated by Washington, centred on restoring the 1974 ceasefire agreement that established a buffer zone between the two countries. Sana reported that the talks resulted in understandings that support stability in the region, framing the process as part of broader diplomatic efforts to enhance security and preserve the unity and integrity of Syria. While Jerusalem offered no immediate comment, Hebrew media said, Israel's Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer attended alongside US envoy to Syria, Tom Barrack. A senior Trump administration official told the Associated Press,
The United States continues to support any efforts that will bring lasting stability and peace between Israel and its neighbors. We want to do everything we can to help achieve that.
The talks come after months of violence between Bedouin clans, Druze groups and government forces in Suwayda, which prompted Israeli airstrikes in defense of Druze communities. Israel says it will not allow hostile forces to entrench along its northern frontier. Meanwhile, Druze leaders have lobbied for American guarantees of security and humanitarian aid. US envoy Tom Barrack also met with Israeli Druze leader Sheikh Muaffaq Tarif in Paris, who asked Washington to help end what he described as a blockade around Suwayda. In a separate development, a group of Israeli settler activists, including young children, crossed into southern Syria on Monday in an attempt to establish a new settlement in territory currently controlled by the Israel Defense Forces. The IDF said troops were dispatched after several civilian vehicles crossed the frontier opposite Alonei Habashan.
IDF troops at the scene returned the civilians safely to the territory of the State of Israel after a short time.
The military called the incident a grave offence that endangers the public and IDF troops. Since the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime last December, Israeli forces have been deployed at 9 positions inside southern Syria, most within the UN-patrolled buffer zone. Jerusalem has argued this presence is necessary to contain jihadist factions and to defend its northern border amid Syria's volatile transition.
Violence in southern Syria has put a spotlight on a small but influential minority, the Druze. The Druze are Arabs who follow a religion derived from a branch of Islam. They maintain a degree of secrecy about the practice of their faith that emerged in the 11th century. Some hardline Sunni Muslims deem them heretics. Syria's interim president Ahmed al-Sharaa, an Islamist who once belonged to al-Qaeda, has called the Druze part of the Syrian fabric and vowed to protect their rights. The Druze straddle Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Israel, and the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. Syria's Druze are concentrated in Suwayda, a southwest region that borders Jordan and in areas near the occupied Golan. They also live in the Damascus suburb of Jeramana. In Israel, Druze primarily reside in the north and the occupied Golan. In Lebanon, they are concentrated in mountainous regions, including Shuf and Alay. The Druze, while a small minority, have often played an outsized role in the politics of the countries where they live. In Israel, they number around 150,000. Unlike Palestinian Arab citizens of Israel, many Druze Arabs serve in the Israeli military and police, and some have reached a high rank, which means their voices cannot be easily ignored by Israel's political leadership. While most Druze in Israel identify as Israeli citizens, more than 20,000 living in the occupied Golan still identify as Syrians. Facing calls from Israeli Druze to help Syrian Druze, Israeli leaders have cited protecting them as a reason for attacking Syria repeatedly this year. Syria's Druze population is estimated to number around 1 million people. While some Druze leaders have urged accommodation with Damascus, others have come out strongly against al-Sharaa. Israel bombed Syria frequently when Assad was in power, seeking to roll back the influence established by Iran and Iran-backed groups, and has painted the new Syrian government as a jihadist threat, saying it won't allow it to deploy forces into southern Syria. Israel has said it wants to avoid any hostile buildup at its border, while also vowing to protect the Druze minority. Israeli troops have also seized Syrian territory adjoining the occupied Golan Heights since December. al-Sharaa has said Israel was promoting division among Syrians, accusing it of seeking to, quote, dismantle the unity of our people.